Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Trent DeBruin, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Mushbaugh. And today we're going to talk about some of the biggest financial mistakes to avoid as a physician. And we know there are a lot of potential mistakes that can be made, so we narrowed it down to 7 of the most important ones. And you've probably heard us talk about the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule in prior episodes, and this is essentially a version of that idea. The mistakes we'll discuss today are some of the ones that tend to trip up a lot of people and can have an especially big impact on your financial life. And while there's a lot more that goes into successfully managing your finances than just avoiding these mistakes, if you can at least start there, you'll have a good foundation and be moving in the right direction. And a good way to think about this is like a football game. So to win the game, you have to do a lot of different things right. Blocking, tackling, catching the ball, running the ball. But if you can at least avoid some of the really big mistakes, things like fumbles, interceptions, blocked punts, or giving up that 50-yard touchdown, by doing those alone, you'll already give yourself a much better chance of winning the game.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Michigan football made a lot of those mistakes this past season. But like I say every season, there's always next year.
Well, why don't you kick us off with mistake number 1 then?
Well, yeah, I think the first mistake is being a Michigan fan instead of a Notre Dame fan. But at least as it pertains to what we're going to talk about today, the first mistake is not having a plan when it comes to managing your finances.
Thanks for clarifying there.
Yeah, exactly. And this is probably the most common one we see, and it's also one of the easiest to make. And the reason it's so easy to make this mistake is that there are simply so many different moving parts in our financial lives, and everyone is unique with their situation, preferences, and what they're looking to accomplish. And because of this, it's tough to understand how to put everything together into an overall plan. But when it comes to managing your finances, the most important thing is starting with a plan and having context around the big picture of your finances and balancing that with enjoying life along the way. And this is important for many reasons, but one of them is simply having context and perspective of the trajectory that you're on and how the decisions you make today impact where you'll be in the future. And we describe having a plan like going on a long road trip. You could just start driving and you'll eventually get somewhere, but where you end up and when you get there is an unknown. However, if you know where you want to go, use Google Maps or some navigation system, you'll know roughly when you'll get to your destination and what adjustments may be needed over time. So in the context of having a financial plan, if you know at least roughly where you want to be in the future, retired at age 60, or having enough saved to fully fund your kids' college in 8 years, then you can have something tangible you can track your progress against. Your goals and preferences, along with things outside of your control, like college inflation, investment returns, or what interest rates will do, mean that you'll likely have to make some changes over time. But having a plan and checking in regularly on your progress acts as a navigation system, so you know if any changes or adjustments are required. Another reason it's so important to have a plan is that financial planning is about aligning the way you use your financial resources with what's most important to you, and striking that balance of saving for the future while enjoying life along the way. And if you love your job and can't see yourself retiring, well, then you may be able to save a little less each year and spend more today. On the flip side, if you're feeling burned out and would like to at least have the flexibility of slowing down or completely retiring earlier than most, then you'll need to save a lot more along the way. And there's no right or wrong answer here, which is why the plan should be aligned based on what's most important to you, as opposed to just following some general rules of thumbs where you may or may not have saved enough or have been saving too much at the expense of enjoying things along the way. And we can't tell you how often we talk to people who have picked up some bit of financial information or some rule of thumb when it comes to finances, like save 15 to 20% of your income or pay down debt as fast as you possibly can, and have adopted it for themselves. And while it's great to have some different pieces of advice versus blindly making a decision, most general guidance is focused on just one piece of your financial life versus having an overall plan for your finances that balances all the competing things you're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to maximize everything toward retirement right away or pay down debt as fast as possible. Everyone's situation is unique, so what works well for another person and is right for them may not necessarily be right for you. By having a plan, you're able to understand what's required for your specific situation to accomplish what you want to accomplish. It helps you understand exactly how much you need to save for different goals, how to invest the money for different goals, how to handle trade-offs between different goals, and how to align your financial decisions. It also helps you be proactive when managing your finances, and there's a big difference between being proactive and reactive. And successfully managing your finances involves being proactive with looking out to the future to create a rough blueprint, making intentional decisions, and then focusing on the things you can control and creating a plan around the things you cannot. And we're not saying that everyone needs to go out and hire a financial planner to go through this exercise. Some people have the time, interest, and expertise to do it by themselves, which is great. But regardless of if you're working with a financial planner or doing it yourself, it's important to avoid the mistake of flying blindly and not having a financial plan. And if you don't have a plan, you may not realize the cost of not taking action today, which leads us to our second mistake of waiting too long to invest.
Yeah, unfortunately, as a physician, you face bigger obstacles here than most people because of that combination of med school training and, for most physicians, student loans makes it nearly impossible to start investing as early as your peers in other professions. However, even when you reach that position of being able to start saving and investing, this is still something that tends to trip people up. At a most basic level, the reason it's so important to start investing early is because of the power of compounding. And this is something we discussed in detail in episode 10, so if you haven't listened to that one, be sure to check it out. But the basic message is that compound interest has the biggest impact on growing your investments, and the longer you let it work for you, the more impact it'll have. And just to provide a simple example of this, let's say you're a U of M physician earning $200,000, maxing out your 403b each year and receiving the 10% university match. So you're saving about $40,000 a year, and let's say you earn an average annual return on your investments of 7%. Well, if this was the situation and we looked at how your investment portfolio would grow over time, you'd see that your portfolio would reach $1 million in about 15 years. Then, around 8 years after that, the portfolio would grow to $2 million. So while it took you about 15 years to accumulate that first $1 million in your portfolio, the second million took you almost half that time, close to 8 years. Well, fast forwarding even more, about 5 years after the portfolio reaches $2 million, it would grow to $3 million. So as you can see, the time it takes to add each additional million to your portfolio continues to shrink, and that's compound interest in action. And looking at the example a different way, let's say you had the same situation, a physician saving $40,000 a year toward retirement and earning a 7% investment return each year, and that physician was planning to retire at age 65, but started investing at 3 different ages, 30, 40, and 50. Well, if they started at age 30, when they retired, they'd have around $5.5 million in their portfolio. If they waited 10 years and started at age 40, they'd have half that much, only $2.5 million. And if they got a really late start and didn't start until age 50, they would end up with only $1 million 15 years later at retirement at age 65. And having gone through this exercise, it's worth noting that this is an extremely simplified example, and while stocks have historically returned around 10% per year and bonds have returned around 5%, there's no guarantee that you would earn 7% going forward, especially not every year, but we'll use it for our purposes. So hopefully that shows you the power of compound interest and why it's so important to start investing as early as possible. So even for those younger attendings who still have student loans to deal with, if you're able to start saving and investing for retirement right away, you can have your money start working for you, and your future self will definitely thank you for that.
Yeah, it's great to start saving as early as possible to take advantage of compounding interest, but it won't do you much good if you aren't saving enough, which is mistake number 3. And this concept of saving enough is going to be different for everyone, depending on their goals and unique circumstances, which is why we started with the biggest mistake to avoid first, of not having a plan. The biggest driver of saving enough tends to be around when you'd like to be financially independent or retire. For example, if you want to be financially independent at age 50, you're going to have to save a much higher percentage of your income toward retirement than a physician who has a goal of financial independence at age 65. Similarly, there may be 2 physicians who both want to be financially independent at 50, but one has no kids while the other has 4 kids and wants to pay for 100% of college for all of them. Well, the physician with kids will have to save a higher percentage of their income each year because of the additional goal of paying for college. So clearly the amount you need to save is going to depend on your situation, but one of the keys to avoiding this mistake is simply understanding what that amount is. This is also why we recommend breaking down goals and saving for them separately, because it allows you to understand potential trade-offs you may want to or need to make. We always like to start with retirement first because that's the furthest goal away and often the biggest goal you need to save for. Using our example, if you go through this exercise of understanding how much you need to save to be financially independent at 50 and fully fund college costs for your 4 kids, you may realize you'll be sacrificing too much today in order to fully meet those goals. At which point, you can make the intentional decision on what you'd like to adjust. Retiring later, spending less in retirement, having your kids pay for some of college, or several of the other options. Regardless, being proactive and understanding if you are saving enough will help you avoid any unfortunate surprises in the future. In practice, this requires putting some thought into what's most important to you, along with some calculations around what's required financially. You do this by first thinking through your various goals and then calculating how much you need to save for them each year. While we use financial planning software for this, there are various calculators available online to help at least get a rough idea around where you stand relative to future college costs or retirement costs. But understanding how much you need to save each year is just the first step. The next step is actually saving it each year and adjusting if necessary. And one of the common mistakes that get in the way of consistently saving enough is lifestyle creep or just having more expenses in the future that you don't have today, like starting a family, buying a bigger house, or nicer cars. So while you may be able to save enough today, this may be a stretch in the future for those that aren't expecting increased future costs or those that have a bigger lifestyle creep than others. The two best ways to stay on track with your plan and avoid lifestyle creep or feeling stretched in the future with some of these bigger ongoing expenses is by saving early and often and paying yourself first. If you're able to save more on the front end of your career, you let compounding interest start working for you earlier, which means you may not to save as much in the future because you're ahead of schedule. However, not everyone wants to do this, and it may be easier to have a better balance of saving consistently over time. This is why we always recommend paying yourself first, which in practice is done by automating your savings. So rather than having to decide month after month how much to save toward different goals, you can just set up an automatic monthly savings from your paycheck or bank account to whatever account you're saving for that goal. Luckily, this automation is easy to do, whether it's saving to your employer's retirement account, a college savings plan, or a bank or investment account. And the benefit of automating your savings is that it takes away the temptation to overspend. And by automating your savings and having a plan to know if that savings is enough for your goals, you're then free to spend whatever is left over each month guilt-free, as opposed to just guessing if you're saving enough or should be saving more or less.
So once you have your plan in place, you start saving early and you're saving enough, the next couple of mistakes are related to what you do with the money you're saving, which leads us to mistake number 4 of being afraid to invest in the stock market. And going back to what we discussed earlier with the power of compounding, there are 3 different variables at work there. 1, the amount of time. 2, the amount of money you're saving and investing each year. And 3, the rate of return on your investments. And mistake number 4 deals with that last one, your rate of return on the money you save. And to provide some general perspective here, when it comes to investing, the 2 basic types of investments are stocks and bonds. And historically, stocks have had higher returns, around 10% per year on average over the past 100 years or so. But their prices also move around a lot more. Some years they can be up 30%, while other years they can be down 20%. Or like we saw in 2020, you can have big swings in both directions all in one year. But bonds, on the other hand, have historically been more stable year to year, but they've also had lower returns, around 5% per year on average. So stocks are riskier because of the uncertainty and volatility year to year, and their higher long-term returns are the compensation for that risk. Now, we always have to point out that prior returns are no guarantee of future returns, and there's no promise that future returns for stocks and bonds will be the same or that stocks will necessarily even have higher returns than bonds. But based on their history and the nature of the two, you'd reasonably expect stocks to have higher returns moving forward. So what does this mean when it comes to investing? Well, the value of your investments in the future will vary dramatically depending on your investment return along the way. For example, let's say you invested $1 today with a 20-year time horizon. Fast forward 20 years, and let's look at how the value would have grown under the 2 scenarios. One where you earn a 10% annual return, and one where you earn a 5% annual return. In the 10% return scenario, your dollar ends up being worth $6.73. But in the 5% return scenario, it ends up being worth $2.65, so less than half as much. So clearly your investment return has a huge impact on how quickly your investments grow over time, which is why, generally speaking, if you have a longer investment time horizon, like saving for retirement, then you're better off having more invested in stocks since you have time to ride the ups and downs of the market while capturing the higher returns of stocks over time. So while everyone's situation is different, and it's important to match your mix of stocks and bonds to your time horizon and your personal comfort level with seeing the fluctuations in your investment accounts, you don't want to limit your long-term returns by not investing enough in stocks. A common situation we come across is physicians who have a significant amount of money in their bank accounts just sitting in cash, either because they don't know what to do with it or they aren't sure if it's the, quote, right time to invest, given the dramatic headlines the financial media always likes to put out there. And this is always hard for us to see because we know how much it's cost them so far, both in terms of dollars and cents, but also missed opportunity to accelerate their retirement timeline or achieve other financial goals they have. And also how much it could continue to cost them over the coming years if they don't make a change. And we have another podcast episode devoted to the key principles of investing. That's episode number 5. And it dives deeper into the most important areas to understand when it comes to investing. But the main mistake to avoid here is being intimidated by the short-term unknowns of investing in the stock market at the expense of achieving lower long-term investment returns.
Exactly. And that short-term uncertainty of the stock market leads us to mistake number 5, which is trying to time the stock market. In other words, trying to guess when to buy and sell and get in or out of the stock market based on whatever is happening or you think will happen. This is such a common mistake when it comes to investing, and the reason is there's a lot of misinformation out there, which is pushed out by the financial media. If you watch CNBC or read financial media, you know they're always talking about the next hot stock or what the market is going to do based on XYZ event going on, which makes people feel like, in order to be successful with investing, they need to make predictions about the future or pick the winners among stocks or time when to get in or out of the market. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Successful investing doesn't involve a ton of activity or making predictions, but rather it involves a steady, disciplined process of sticking to an intentional investment plan over time without trying to make guesses. Just like in baseball, the team that wins isn't usually because of hitting the most home runs, but instead consistently hitting singles and doubles. With the financial media, there's always some crisis du jour, global event they talk about and point to some reason for the next potential market crash. And while various events can have temporarily negative impacts on the market, if you look over the course of history, there have been hundreds of these events, and every time the market has eventually gotten past them and continued its long-term upward trend. This naturally leads people to feel tepid about investing in the stock market, especially if they've been sitting in cash. But like we remind people, there's no bell that rings at the top or bottom of the stock market in advance. Waiting for the perfect time to invest usually just results in missing many great times to invest. And we're often asked about what we think is going to happen to the stock market or what XYZ potential event might mean for it. And while we're happy to provide context and perspective, we prefer to give the honest answer, which is I don't know. And that's not to say we don't have opinions about what will happen, but we know better than to make any investment decisions based on predictions or speculations. Anyone who tells you with confidence that they know what's going to happen in the future, at best doesn't know what they don't know, and at worst is lying. You don't need to worry about not knowing what's going to happen in the future because no one else knows what is going to happen in the future either. What the decades of academic research show is that almost nobody can consistently time the market or predict what's going to happen. In those cases where someone appears to have that ability are often simply pure chance and probability. If you have 1 million people flipping a coin 20 times each, someone is bound to get 20 heads in a row. And that's the same thing with people that have had successful investment experiences, or so people think. And similarly, the evidence shows that the average investor underperforms their investment by a substantial margin over time because of the behavioral mistakes like trying to time when to buy and sell and get in or out of the stock market. Said differently, if you bought an investment and fell asleep for the next 20 years, when you woke up, you would have dramatically outperformed the average investor who gets in their own way. Investment success is not about beating the market or performing substantially better. It's about simply capturing the returns the market provides. And if you need to earn a higher return than what the market provides to meet your goals, you might need to reassess those goals or the amount you're saving each year. Because mistakes happen when you try to get above average returns, which often leads to you not even getting average returns. Successful investing is about coming up with the right investment strategy, including the mix of stocks and bonds on the front end, then sticking to it in a disciplined way over time, consistently saving and investing more each year, and riding out the ups and downs of the market along the way, and only making changes to your investment approach when your situation changes, not in response to market movements. There's a great quote about investing by Warren Buffett. He says, "We don't have to be smarter than the rest, we just have to be more disciplined than the rest." And that quote sums up the perfect antidote to the common mistake of trying to time the market, which is having discipline and patience when it comes to investing.
So moving on from investment-related mistakes, we'll talk about mistake number 6, which is taking on too much debt. And this is a unique one for physicians because most physicians naturally have a different experience with debt than other people, starting with med school. Most physicians have to borrow to pay for med school, and based on the latest numbers, the average physician coming out of med school has around $200,000 in student loans. However, that's not necessarily the type of debt we're talking about, since for most physicians, it's unavoidable. And also, it's money that you're borrowing to invest in yourself and your career, so it gives you a return by improving your earning potential in the future. The type of debt we're more focused on is debt that you're using to purchase something for your lifestyle, whether that's a mortgage for a house, a loan for a car, or credit card debt to pay for a vacation or other types of purchases. And the way to think about debt is that it's essentially borrowing from your financial future. There's something you want to buy, but you don't have the money to pay for it in full right now. So rather than saving up over time, you're pulling that purchase forward to the present by borrowing the money to make it. When you do this, there's a give back, and that's future payments you have to make on that debt. When you take out a loan of any kind, you not only have to pay back the amount you borrowed, but you also have to pay interest on that money. So the more debt you have, the more money that goes out the door each month to make payments on your debt. And that puts pressure on your cash flow because those payments are fixed, so there's less money left over each month, and that can limit your ability to save for other goals that are important, like retirement or college for the kids. And when it comes to debt, it can be easy to take on more than you should because there are so many people willing to lend you money, especially as a physician. But keep in mind that just because you can pay for something doesn't mean you can afford it. So having too much debt clearly isn't good, but when thinking about what the right amount of debt is, what are some things to consider? Well, one is that there are certain types of debt that you should avoid entirely, specifically credit card debt and other debt that carries high interest rates. So make sure you're paying off your credit cards in full each month. Another thing is thinking about your total debt relative to your income, because your income is what you use to pay back your debt. As a general rule of thumb, it's good to keep your total debt less than 3 times your gross income. And And lastly, keep in mind the emotional side of things as well. Different people feel differently about debt, and if you're someone who's stressed out by debt, even if you have less than 3 times your gross income, it might still be too much for you, and it might be worth paying it down faster in order to get that peace of mind benefit. But really, the most important thing when it comes to debt is avoiding using it to live beyond your means, because that's when people tend to get in the most trouble.
And of course, we saved the least fun topic to discuss last, but also one that can have the biggest impact, which is not having proper insurance or creating an intentional estate plan. We know this isn't a popular Friday night date topic, but unfortunately a premature death or disability are always a possibility. And as I mentioned, can have significant impact on your loved ones if you don't have proper coverage. Like we always talk about, you want to focus on the things you can control and plan around the things you cannot, which a premature death or disability is one of those areas you need to plan around by having adequate insurance coverage. And the reason these scenarios are particularly important from a financial perspective is that for most people, there are other people who depend on your income. So if you were to pass away or become disabled, your income would go away, and those people would be left in a difficult position financially because they would still have living expenses to cover, debt payments to make on things like a mortgage, and goals like retirement and college for the kids to save for. Also, in the case of a disability that keeps you from working, not only would the people who depend on you be in a tough position, but you would be as well, since you still would want to have the same lifestyle you had while needing to save for future goals. This is where insurance comes into play. At a basic level, the purpose of insurance is to protect against those rare but possible situations that could have a significantly negative impact on your household's financial picture, and not as a saving or investment vehicle. The 3 most relevant types of insurance here are life, disability, and long-term care insurance, but we'll focus on life and disability insurance right now since long-term care is more of a nuanced conversation. For life insurance, it pays out a lump sum of money upon the death to a beneficiary you name, while disability insurance pays out a certain amount of money each month if you're no longer able to work. The first step to avoid this mistake is by having enough life and disability insurance coverage, so that if you were to pass away or become disabled, the people who depend on your income would still be protected from a financial perspective while still being able to meet those future goals you have. We won't go too far into the details in this episode, since we'll have a future episode talking about insurance, but in terms of amounts, for life insurance, a general rule of thumb is 8 to 11 times your income. And for disability insurance, you want enough so that you can continue to fund your lifestyle today while saving for future financial goals from that disability income, such as retirement, since disability insurance stops paying out at age 65 typically. After you ensure you have enough coverage, then the next most common mistake is not buying the right type of insurance, which is a combination of paying the least amount for the coverage you need and covering your specific risks. When it comes to life insurance, for almost everyone, the right type of insurance to buy is term life insurance. Term life insurance provides coverage for a set period of time, could be 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, and then it goes away, which is the most cost-effective way to purchase the coverage. With insurance, we only recommend people pay for coverage as long as they have the risk, which as you get closer to being financially independent, the need for life insurance decreases, which lines up for when you have to stop paying those life insurance premium as the term expires. This is contrary to what many insurance agents may try to sell you, which is whole or universal life insurance, where you pay a lot more for less coverage. Again, we won't go into the weeds here, but this is often sold to people because of the large commission the insurance agents get by selling it, and not because it's what's best for you. As for disability insurance, when it comes to buying the right type of coverage, physicians have unique needs here. There's a big difference between meeting a general disability definition of working at McDonald's versus being able to perform your specific job as a surgeon. This is why you want to make sure you have the right type of coverage and policy features, including the own occupation definition that covers the specific duties of your specialty as a physician. And in addition to having the right life and disability insurance, you also want to have an estate plan, which there's often a misconception around estate planning only being for the wealthy or avoiding estate taxes, but that's just not the case. For a physician with minor children, the biggest reason you want to have an estate plan here, particularly a will, is because it specifies who would care for your children by naming a guardian if something happened to you and or your spouse. Whereas if you didn't have an estate plan, then your guardians will be decided by your state's laws. The second biggest reason for having an estate plan comes into play later in life as your investments grow and the dollar amounts being left to your heirs or charity are a bigger number. This won't impact everyone, but if you have children, not everyone wants them to inherit $2 million as a 20-year-old in college. To avoid this, you can have an estate plan that outlines when your children can have access to your inheritance. For instance, a common setup is 1/3 of the money earmarked for them at 25, 1/2 at 30, and the rest at 35, which allows them to mature and not have full access to the money all at once. So as you can see, having an estate plan isn't just about saving taxes for most people, but rather it's about avoiding stress and conflict for your heirs by making things easy for them and having an estate plan that clearly outlines who gets what and when they can have access to that money. And I know this is a riveting topic, so I'm glad Trent let me talk through the fun topics here, but joking aside, while addressing your insurance or estate plan may not feel like a top priority, They're a very important part of protecting your loved ones.
So that wraps it up with our discussion of the key financial mistakes to avoid as a physician. For many of these mistakes, they can be easy to avoid if you have the proper perspective and discipline, and sidestepping them can give you a big leg up when it comes to managing your financial life. So hopefully our discussion today was helpful in understanding some of the key areas to watch out for and some of the things you can do on your part to avoid being tripped up by them. And just to summarize the key points, mistake number 1 is not having a plan. So be intentional with your finances and have the big picture and a proactive plan rather than being reactive or piecemeal. Mistake number 2 is waiting too long to start investing. Make sure you're starting as early as possible to harness the power of compound interest. Mistake number 3 is not saving enough. Make sure you're saving enough each year to meet all your different goals. Mistake number 4, being afraid of stocks. Have the right percentage invested in stocks for your time horizon and risk tolerance to capture the higher expected returns of stocks over time. Mistake number 5 is trying to time the market. So don't try to time when to buy or sell or get in and out of the market. Instead, have the discipline to ride the ups and downs of the market over time. Mistake number 6 is taking on too much debt. Avoid using debt to live beyond your means. And lastly, mistake number 7 is not having proper insurance or an estate plan. So make sure you have the right amounts of life and disability insurance as well as an estate plan to guard against those rare but possible scenarios of death or disability. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of the show. As always, if you have questions to ask or feedback to share, please email us at info@mdwmllc.com. And we really mean that. We love to hear from you and we love the questions we receive, so please keep them coming and don't be afraid to reach out. You can also access the show notes by visiting the podcast page of our website at mdwmllc.com/podcast. Take care, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.